Superheroes. Remember when superheroes were a thing? I've never really been into superheroes. In fact, I don't really have one that's my favorite. I have a couple that I think are pretty cool. Batman, Wolverine, and even, if you can see, Captain America. And really, the only reason I have this shirt is because I found it for $1.99 at Goodwill. There's a couple mistakes with it. There's a couple things that are wrong, which is why it probably ended up at Goodwill. But I've never really been a superhero fan. But there for a while, superheroes were all the rage. In fact, it seemed like every couple of months there was a new superhero movie, and they were breaking the bank at the movie theaters, and the box office was going nuts because we were watching one more superhero do whatever it is that they were to do, with whatever power they had. One of the things about superheroes that I never understood was the alter ego, like Batman and Bruce Wayne, or Superman and Clark Kent. They had these two different personalities, and they had to live these lives that seemed to be so separate and yet so intertwined, and yet somehow nobody knew that this one was this one, even though there were so many similarities, and yet they were constantly battling the two lives. And sometimes those lives crossed over, and sometimes they got mixed up, and sometimes there was confusion. And it just seems so difficult. Why would you want to live two different lives? But then there were superheroes like Captain America who were one thing, and then because of a moment, they became another thing, like Spider-Man and other superheroes that were this, and then something happened, the Hulk, Bruce Banner, and then they became this. The life they had before is no longer the life that they lived now. See, superheroes are an interesting dynamic. Now we can watch superheroes and we can actually see parts of our lives in them, even though we don't have the powers that they do. Take the two lives, for instance, the alter ego. Have you ever felt like you're living two different lives? That on one side you're this person, and the other side you're this person, and it gets confusing and it crosses over and you don't know where the overlap is, and sometimes you're trying to do this and other times you're trying to do that. Well, that's actually our passage in Ephesians today. As it's the middle of the week, it's Wednesday, it means it's weekly devotion time, and we've been in Ephesians, and we're in Ephesians chapter 4, starting in verse 17, which says this: "So I tell you this, and insist on it in the Lord, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do in the futility of their thinking. They are darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardening of their hearts. Having lost all sensitivity, they've given themselves over to sensuality, so as to indulge in every kind of impurity, and they are full of greed." See, Paul, who wrote Ephesians to this group of people in the church at Ephesus, was talking about this former life that they lived. They had been Gentiles. They had been people that had not known God. They had lived a certain way. And they had known this certain way, and they'd understood it and been a part of their culture, but a part of who they were. And they were living double lives, so to speak, because there was this old way they were living, and now there was this new way. And Paul reaches out to them and he says, "I insist in the Lord that you no longer live as the Gentiles do. I insist that this life that you used to have, you need to put it behind you. That you should no longer be futile in your thinking or darkened in your understanding or separated from the life of God because of the ignorance in your heart that's been hardened. Having lost all sensitivity, they've given themselves over to sensuality so as to indulge in every kind of impurity, and they're also full of greed." I know that life. I understand that life. In fact, we live in a world that is trying to live that life. On this side, wanting whatever it is their heart desires, but not really understanding, being ignorant in it because their heart has been hardened. That there's this lack of understanding, yet going after everything that's sensual, everything that's impure, because of their need to fulfill what it is that they want. The overwhelming need for greed. And yet Paul says, be different. This is what you once were. Instead, now do this. He says, that, however, is not the way of life you've learned when you heard about Christ, and were taught in him accordance with the truth that is in Jesus. You were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. See, this way of life they used to know, this was the old self that now they're being told, put off. Put off the old self and put on the new self. And that in Christ, we've got a new way of living, that we were taught in accordance with the truth that's in Jesus. With regard to the former way of life, we must put off our old self, which is being corrupted by deceitful desires. It's this tension between the old way we used to live and the new way we're supposed to live. And there's this deceitful desire within it saying, come back to me, come back this way, come back over here, it's fun. And there's these things that you should be doing because of you, because of your greed, because of your impurity, because of your sensuality. Come this way, it's so good. And Paul says, I insist on you in the Lord, do not be here instead, because you've been changed. Made new in the attitude of your minds with the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. So because of Jesus, we're no longer what we were. We're now this new self that's created to be righteous and pure and holy like God. See, it's this battle between us. And if we were to look at the superheroes, who would you rather be? Bruce Wayne or Batman? See, if there was a superhero that I could be, it would be Batman. Because Batman seems so real, especially in the new ones. Like when you watch the new Batmans, you can see the possibility that somebody like me, a regular, normal nobody, could become a superhero. And that's really cool. Because Batman used these gadgets that were so real life that if you did have enough money or you had the right person or the ability to make them, you could really be a superhero. Well, see, that's the battle within us. Do I want to be Bruce Wayne, who's living it up in all the sensual desires and all the parties and all the craziness? Or do I want to be the one who's fighting for righteousness? See, that's what God's called us to. There's two lives. I'd rather live this one. So don't fight the two people inside of you. Instead, be like Captain America, where you were something and now you're something different. In fact, Captain America is one of those where he had become so pure and so good that Tony Stark made fun of him and said, ooh, Captain America. But you know what? That's not such a bad thing. We should aspire to live a life like that, righteous and holy like God, so that when the world sees us, they see him through us. So stop fighting. Don't be like this. Be like this instead, because of what Jesus did, who died for us on the cross and has cleansed us from all unrighteousness. So stop running this way and run this way, and then see what God does. I bet he does incredible things in your life when we finally give in to being righteous and holy like him. Hopefully you're having a great week. I'll see you next week.